Hi everyone. Today, let's talk about the Tesla shareholders meeting and some other news. Then I'll go over the economic data, as well as Max Payne for the end of the week. Then we'll get into the charts, as well as my results for the day and my thoughts going into tomorrow's session. Don't forget to check out the Patreon and the Twitter linked in the description. If you like trading stocks and options and making money, definitely like and subscribe. I make videos like this every single day that the markets are open, as well as Sundays, so make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Welcome to the Portfolio Bulletin. Let's get started. So Tesla's shareholder meeting was today, and there were some interesting points. The main piece is that he believes the economy will pick up after about 12 months from now, and that the Cybertruck should be delivered later this year. He apologizes for the delays, but it will be the vehicle that he drives on a daily basis, so he does like it quite a bit. He also brushed off some comments on Twitter being a distraction to him. He said it was short term, but he had to do some major open heart surgery to ensure its survival, and now that he's handed it over to Linda Yaccarino, that kind of calms down the fears that Elon is focused on Twitter and not Tesla, which should bring some bulls back to Tesla. They're also working on a new drivetrain and a new look for the Model 3. And finally, he mentioned that they're working on an advertising model for Tesla, and they'll see how that plays out to drum up some demand. Moving over to Home Depot earnings, they put out a pretty weak forecast for demand, so let's see what they had to say. The stock dropped more than 5% or $13 a share in pre-market trading, although it did recover some of its gains and ended up down 1.5%. It did beat earnings estimates by 2 cents. And then finishing up here with revenue, you can see it came in at $37 billion versus the $38 expected, so they missed by about $1 billion. And for comps, they were down 4.5% compared to the consensus at 1.6%. So overall, everything for Home Depot not going great. And lastly, for news here, looking at the debt ceiling issue, once again, they had a meeting today and they said that there was some progress. They mentioned that Republicans are pushing for stricter work requirements for Social Safety Net, and that we're still looking at the 1 June date for a potential default date. Not to go into a ton of detail here, but they said they're still pretty far apart, but that they are moving in the right direction, that it's, quote, a better process now. And just because they're far apart does not mean that they're not going to get to an agreement before the deadline. So slightly more optimistic, actually, than what we've heard here recently. Moving over to the economic calendar, looking at retail sales. Core retail sales came in at expectation. Headline came in at 0.4 versus 0.8. So we missed on the headline, and that was definitely bearish for the markets. Looking at tomorrow, we have building permits at 8:30. That's the big one. Crude oil here at 10:30. Not a huge thing, but fairly interesting. And then don't forget, we have initial jobless claims on Thursday, as well as existing home sales and Philadelphia manufacturing. Moving over to Max Payne for Friday. You can see Max Payne is still at 405, and really not a lot has changed. There's a few more options here in the market. Call ratio still at 2.2, and we did close right around that 410 level, so we'll see if this holds here tomorrow. I still think 410 is probably going to be the low at the close. For Friday, I think we'll end up a little bit higher than that, probably somewhere between 410 and 415. But like I said in yesterday's video, that doesn't mean we can't dip down to like 405 or even 400 and then rally at the end of day Friday to close in this range. So keep that in mind, still watching Max Payne for any changes. Moving over to the SPY, you can see we came down, fell into that support level once again, rallying here a little bit after hours after testing this zone. If this breaks down here tomorrow, I'm looking at 405.29 to my next level of support here on the 12-hour. We also have the 144 EMA sitting at 405.22. So key area here, if this breaks down, I think it would look something like this move that we had here, looking at 2 May into 3 May, test that level, get a little bit of a bounce, then a bigger move down into this zone. That would be interesting. We would also be breaking this trend line that I'm watching. So definitely keeping an eye on this one tomorrow. Certainly could hold this level and bounce back up to 414, but it does look more bearish here on the SPY going into tomorrow's session. Moving over to the NASDAQ here, you can see we continue to march higher. We made a higher high after a brief pullback in the pre-market into the market open, tested the 55 EMA on the hourly chart, and then it was straight up for about 4 hours. And then right at the end of the day, we had a bigger pullback to the 21 EMA. Now we're bouncing a little bit into the after hours. So overall, still a bull trend, still watching this on the 12-hour. kind of watching this trend line here now. We'll see if this continues to hold or if we're going to break this and push up to 330. That would be very interesting. Not a lot of movement today, but overall still bullish. Moving over to the IWM and the Dow, you can see we came down and tested these previous lows. The Russell has been testing this area for a few days now. If it breaks down from here, it would be looking at 170.35. If it kind of holds in this zone, which is not really a key zone for me, but if it does hold here, I'd be looking at 174.38. And again, if that breaks, looking up to 176. So kind of in no man's land for me. See if it breaks down further. My guess is that it will. Looking at the Dow, on the other hand, this continues to look very weak. We talked about this looking weak yesterday. Big sell-off, taking out all these previous lows and the 200 SMA, looking down at 329.40 as my next level of support. If that level breaks, then I'm watching down at 325.72. You also have this downtrend line sitting just below that horizontal support that I'll be watching as well. But overall, more bearish on the Dow than I was yesterday. Moving over to Apple and Tesla, not much happening here. Apple basically hung out in this zone, holding support. So waiting to see if this breaks up and starts to make new highs, or if it breaks down from this point. No clear direction on Apple yet, and it's holding at support. Tesla, on the other hand, basically went sideways but had a slight bullish day, which is interesting. It is holding that 55 EMA that I mentioned yesterday. I said yesterday that if this area broke down, I would expect this to move down into these previous lows with some support down around 160. But we're back above my support line here at 167.34. If we can hold above that zone, then you have to be looking a little bit more bullish going back into these previous highs. Momentum is slightly bearish. RSI retesting that 50 line, and if it breaks down from here, that's going to be pretty bearish. And like I said, still watching that 55 EMA. Moving over to AMD and Alphabet, you can see both of these stocks are putting the team on their back right now for the NASDAQ. AMD got all the way down to $81, and now it's back up to 101.50, retested that 102.27 level, and it rejected a little bit from that area. That's the most recent high here, so if it breaks out from there, I would be looking for more bullishness. Not a ton of overhead resistance either. Looking at Google, similar thesis. Big rally, consolidation, breakout, continuation. Both of these stocks look very strong going into tomorrow's session. Moving over to Snowflake and Amazon, you can see Snowflake finished its pullback, rallied back up to these previous highs. If this breaks out here tomorrow, that would be very bullish. It is getting some divergence here, though, on RSI. So we have a much higher RSI read on that previous peak. Now we have similar price action with lower strength. So this might be a bit of a double top. I would watch this one very closely if you're trying to go bullish here on Snowflake. Similar thesis actually on Amazon. It did make a higher high, and it is above my horizontal support at 112.99. But look at this divergence on Amazon. We have clear lower prices with higher RSI, and now we have higher prices with weaker strength. So looking for this to start pulling back, that would be interesting here on Amazon. And if these stronger stocks, which are basically propping up the whole market at this point, then I would expect the NASDAQ to start going the direction of all the other major indices. Moving over to staples and discretionary here, you can see staples breaking down fairly strongly. Momentum, very bearish. RSI, also bearish. Big volume to the downside as well. Much bigger volume than on these previous moves into this zone. So if this breaks through these previous levels here, then 75.40 does seem like a reasonable level. We also have the 144 EMA sitting down at 75.47, as well as this trend support around 75.67. So watching all those key levels here. But this breakdown is starting to come to fruition. We've been talking about this for a little bit now. Moving over to discretionary, slightly bearish day, down about 0.4%, but overall still holding up much better than staples, which is interesting. So 55 EMA continuing to hold, tested that level once again, still in my zone of supply. But at this point, it seems like this is kind of turning into some support. We're making higher highs here now. We're not breaking down. Discretionary is showing some strength compared to staples, which is interesting considering that the overall markets are going down besides the NASDAQ. Moving over to oil and gas and utilities. Typically, I show the best performer and the worst performer here, but I want to talk about both of these. They were both very negative today. We talked about utilities looking very weak yesterday, and look at that big red bar that we had. Took out that level, took out these previous lows. Now we're looking at 66.54 to see if that level holds. Definitely super bearish here on utilities. Oil and gas also had a pretty bearish day, so we'll be watching that one. Looking at 116.64 to hold now that we're below that 120.57 level. So overall bearish going into tomorrow based on this move, but certainly could come into support, retest this low, and then continue higher. RSI still much higher than it was here on 3 May, but similar prices, so slight divergence there. But overall, both of these sectors look pretty weak. Moving over to transports here on the hour and the daily, we got the breakdown that we expected from resistance, which is interesting. We're now below all the EMAs and SMAs on the daily chart. We're at key trend support, so watching this now. If we get the candle break continuation lower, just like we did here, that would be very interesting. We just end right at that point, gap down and break lower. Does give you an opportunity to go short early in the session, but then we had 3 very bullish days coming out of that previous dip low. So keep an eye on this one. I do think it's going to go lower. I do think we'll get a retest of this 217.37 area. And then looking at that on the hourly chart, still super bearish. We're also below all the EMAs and SMAs as well as VWAP, momentum, super bearish, RSI, also very bearish. Moving over to semis here on the hourly chart and the daily chart. You can see we did make a higher high, but we ended up closing actually slightly down, just 0.02% lower. And now this looks like a wick rejection and a potential for a move lower tomorrow. Definitely not a great candle pattern at this previous resistance through this head and shoulders that we ended up getting the follow through on. So overall, still in a bullish pattern, but potentially setting up for a pullback tomorrow. Moving over to yields, I've been kind of skipping this because they've been in the same zone for a while, but right now they're actually showing a little bit of strength, which is interesting. So we had a low and a higher low setup. Similar on the 10-year, low, higher low setup. Now we're actually making a higher high versus this previous high on both charts. And then we tapped that resistance here on the 10-year. If this continues higher, that would be bearish. 2-year still holding in the zone, but similar thesis, it is above my resistance. And again, if this holds and pushes back up to 4.25, that would be interesting. Last time we got here, we did get a pretty significant breakdown from that level, but still bearish for equities if this continues higher in the short term. Moving over to the 50 and 200-day averages here on the daily chart. We had a big move lower here, so this looks super bearish now. We're now below my support on both of these charts. Looking back to these previous lows, potentially on the 200 down at 36.23. We broke that 200 SMA. Definitely looks bearish. Looking back down to these March lows. Similarly here on the 50-day average, we broke that level looking down to 32.22, and I would expect this to go much lower over the coming days. Moving over to the dollar here, you can see we got that fake out in the early morning hours and then rallied through the session. So this looks much stronger now, more bullish, above the EMAs and SMAs on the hourly chart. 12-hour chart, however, looking at this 200 sitting up at 102.78. So definitely could find resistance here, but it is still short-term bullish. RSI ticking higher, momentum still bullish. Overall, I still think the dollar is going to go higher, but it might be waiting for that option expiration before it goes much higher in the short term. Moving over to JNK and TLT here. JNK broke support, looks super bearish. We're looking back to these previous lows right around $89.90 or $90. If this area breaks, then I'm looking down to $89. Super bearish. You would expect that equities are going to go with this, and that will get a continuation here tomorrow. TLT, on the other hand, also took out these lows, also tested trend support. We'll see if this holds. 102.50 is a pretty strong level. Certainly could push back up to 103.70, but as we talked about on yields, they do look like they're setting to go a little bit higher, which should push TLT down, even if we get a shorter term pullback up to VWAP and the 9 EMA. Then I would expect that to roll over here on the 4-hour chart. Moving over to the VIX here. You can see this looks much stronger now. So we have this low, higher low setup. We got the continuation here today. Got above 1808 for just a moment. Got that wick rejection from these previous highs. If this breaks out here and pushes back up to 1880, up to this previous trend around 19, that would be super bearish for equities. See how that plays out. I also have a level here at 1850 on the 12-hour chart. And my next level above that is 20, which coincides with the 144 and 200 SMA up here. Momentum on both charts, super bullish, as well as RSI, both look quite strong. Moving over to my accounts, I just want to highlight that TastyTrade added this dashboard feature. So they're showing news, which is pretty interesting. If you're interested in my broker, there is a link in the description, but I think this is a pretty cool addition. Moving over to my accounts, I did fairly well on the day. It says 200, but I think I came out at around 173 up on the day. I ended up taking a position here on my Roth, which did not work out here at the end of session. We'll see how that plays out tomorrow. Everything is looking a little bit more bearish going into the close. So keeping an eye on that one. That position is down at 326, so definitely within striking distance for tomorrow. Otherwise, looking at my individual account, I had lots of puts and calls here on the day. I ended up rolling out some of my calls because I was getting tested a little bit, but I ended up rolling them out, which helped me later in the day. You can see those bigger profits coming in towards the end of the session with that bigger move down. And then I have a little bit of losses here on these puts down at 326 and 325, as well as 324 going into tomorrow's session. Like I said, I am fairly bearish across the markets, but the NASDAQ has been holding up very well. So overall, kind of neutral on the NASDAQ, but still bearish on everything else. I'll keep a close eye on it, but overall still neutral on the NASDAQ. Then I also picked up a 325 put and 331 call here going out 2 days, which is in a slight profit right now. So like I said, still neutral on the NASDAQ. Let me know down in the comments section what you thought of the Tesla shareholder meeting or the Home Depot earnings. Definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video. Make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.